So to absolutely nobody's surprise at all, Russia has increased the number of attacks against Ukraine as ceasefire talks are underway. I mean, who could have possibly seen that coming? I mean, it's exactly what Russia has said for a long time, for what it's worth. But it's not just in the air, pretty significant drone and missile attack overnight. They're also pushing on the ground in really one area. We're going to talk about that here with a battlefield update in the second half of the video. Now, overnight, according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they carried out a drone and missile attack using sea, air, and land-based systems. Russia did not provide any more details other than saying they were targeting UAV manufacturing facilities across Ukraine. So in trying to get more clarity on what this attack actually looked like, we're going to Ukraine for some of their interception numbers here. They say on the night of April 6th, Russia carried out a combined strike on Ukraine with air, ground, and sea-based missiles and strike UAVs. According to preliminary data, the Air Force detected 132 enemy air attack vehicles, 23 missiles, and 109 drones. And of those drones, we have some that were strike UAVs and some that apparently were decoys. We're hearing more and more about that recently. I've got some clips that I'll show here in a second, what those actually look like and how they're being utilized. Again, according to Ukraine, they say 9 KH-101 or KH-55SM cruise missiles were launched. Those are the air-launched cruise missiles from Tu-95 aircraft. They say 8 caliber cruise missiles were launched from the Black Sea. That's notable because we haven't heard of very many Black Sea launches in quite a while. I'm going to come back to that here in a minute. 6 Iskander ballistic missiles launched from Bryansk and 109 Shahed UAVs against strike and decoy drones. A note on the Black Sea launches. I saw immediately people say, oh, look, Russia is violating the Black Sea ceasefire. There has never been a ceasefire in place. It hasn't existed. Every time the two parties have gotten close on something, Russia has come in with additional demands, saying, yeah, we'll do that as soon as this other thing happens. So the first broad-based ceasefire Ukraine agreed to with the United States, and then Russia said, yes, we will agree to that so long as Ukraine, as long as there's no more intel sharing or weapons sent from the Western countries to Ukraine, and Ukraine stops mobilization. Right, so they added demands on top of it. So that ceasefire did not go into effect. The Black Sea ceasefire a couple weeks ago is the next one that seemed like it really could be a real thing. That and a ban on striking energy infrastructure. But at the same time, before that could actually be agreed upon by both parties, Russia added additional requirements saying, actually, first, we're going to need a bunch of sanctions lifted before this can actually go into place. Sanctions haven't been lifted. So I would like for these ceasefires to be in place, but there's really not much value in saying that one side or the other has violated a ceasefire because it's never been in effect. But I do think, anybody who's holding out hope that there's going to be a goodwill gesture, in this case by Russia, and say, you know what, we're going to lay off Ukraine for a little while we sort out these negotiating points, push that out of your mind. There's no reason they have to do that. There's no indication that they're going to do that. Russia is likely not going to abide by the terms of a ceasefire until it is actually in effect. And even then, let's be honest, probably a little suspect. Now, in terms of the interceptions here, Ukraine says as of 10 o'clock in the morning, they downed 53 different air targets. 6 of the 9 KH-101s they say they shot down. 6 of the 8 calibers were shot down. Only 1 of the 6 Iskanders, and then 40 Shaheds were shot down. Well, maybe 93 of the 109. They say 53 of those were actually these decoy-type drones, and we'll get into that here in a second, but clearly, some of these munitions made their way into Ukraine. Clearly, some of these munitions impacted in Ukraine. It's not unusual to not know the effects on target. Ukraine does not release that data right away, except in the case of yesterday or 2 days ago when there's very clearly a strike against a residential area in Ukraine. They were very quick to put that out because there was no operational security at risk to say, hey, look, this missile landed in Kryvyi Rih in a residential area by a playground and a restaurant. So we don't actually know the impact of those strikes in Ukraine. But looking at these decoys here, this looks to be, and I've seen them called Gerbera's, Gerbera drone decoys, which is kind of a little bit of a spinoff from the Garand-style drone, which is the Russian version of the Shahed, these Dorito-shaped, flying, long-range strike munitions. Those are one-way attack drones. And what we've seen more and more in recent months is the use of decoys by both sides. In this case, we're going to be looking at the Russian ones. And what they're doing, it looks like, is it's kind of a mix. Some of these Gerberas, I'm going to have a hard time saying that for some reason, it looks like some of them are coming equipped with just sensors. So, like, they're still able to look and see where they're flying, like a sort of reconnaissance, but it's only one way. and there's no munition in those. And they know this because some of these have been shot down, others have just crashed, and Ukraine goes up to the site and is like, there's no warhead on this thing. So that's what leads people to view this as decoys, right? They're taking up space in the air defense world, if you will. People have to look at these, and you can't tell as it's flying overhead, is there a warhead on that thing, or is it a decoy? So you have to expend munitions, you have to expend resources to shoot it down. So a key note with these right now is, I understand where this goes in people's mind is drone swarms and overwhelming certain assets. Things could still be overwhelmed, but the swarming technology doesn't appear to be there quite yet, at least in these models. These look like individually launched. So they are the same as the Garand-style drones. A target is chosen. They launch these things. They're slow-moving. They make their way to the target. And maybe they get there, maybe they don't. They just kind of have to get in the general airspace to have some sort of effect in terms of a decoy. But there's no indication right now that they're actually able to communicate with one another and kind of like swarm a target at once, if that makes sense. Now, turning to some statements here from Ukrainian President Zelensky on the strikes last night, he said, quote, "The pressure on Russia is still insufficient, and the daily Russian strikes on Ukraine prove it. Last night, ballistic missiles were launched against Kyiv while attack drones targeted the region. The number of air attacks is increasing. This is how Russia reveals its true intentions, to continue the terror for as long as the world allows it. Over the past week, they launched more than 1,460 guided aerial bombs, nearly 670 attack drones, and over 30 missiles of various types against Ukrainian cities and villages, against our people. More than 20 of them took place just last night." He said these attacks are Putin's response to the international diplomatic efforts. Each of our partners, the United States, all of Europe, the entire world, has seen that Russia intends to continue the war and the killing. That is why there can be no easing of pressure. All efforts must be aimed at guaranteeing security and bringing peace even closer. Now, a note here is when looking at Russian media since these ceasefire talks have initiated from day one, all Russian sources are saying there's nobody on that side saying maybe we'll stop fighting and wait to see how this plays out. Across the board, even when it seems like there's progress, every Russian source that I see continues to hammer home that the military operation, the war, will continue until there's an actual hard line to stop. So again, if anybody's holding out hope that there's going to be some easing of this conflict before an actual agreement is reached, I'd set that aside for a while now. Now, turning over to some battlefield updates here, I'm going to look at Suryak map. This will be linked in the description below, as well as Deep State map, another resource we'll use here in a second. So looking at all of Ukraine here, there's three areas I want to focus in on to talk about the progress or lack of progress in recent weeks. Of course, moving up here to Kursk, we've seen that Ukraine has largely been pushed out of Kursk entirely. They do still hold some terrain, some farmland. I don't believe there's very many villages in these areas here, but there is still a Ukrainian presence in these two small pockets in Kursk, which is something. But what we've seen in recent weeks kind of quietly is Russia has actually moved from Kursk into Ukraine. So this is the Sumy region of Ukraine, and you see that they not just pushed back to the border, but they've advanced now into just the Russian Ministry of Defense just the other day said that Basivka right here had been liberated, quote, by the Russian forces. So it's hard to tell at this point. We're not getting a lot of footage out of this. Hard to tell if this is a significant advance, if this is just, did Ukrainian forces pull back to defend other areas? The number of Russian forces being utilized in this attack isn't clear quite yet. So we don't know if this is going to wrap up, 2 to 3 kilometers inside of Ukrainian territory, or if this is actually the start of another large operation. My gut says it's probably the former. This is probably a little bit of a buffer zone that Russia is trying to set up following the Kursk incursion by Ukraine, and I wouldn't expect necessarily a larger push on Sumy, if you will, at least not right now. Now, moving a little further south, we actually have the Belgorod operation, which is continuing today. Much of the fighting is happening in these two areas here on Debidovka and Popovka. We did start to get a little bit of footage out about this, back and forth, mixed. Most of the Russian reports today are still saying the situation is complicated, and we're hearing very little from Ukraine. That said, this is about the extent of advance from a week or more ago, so we're not seeing any sort of rapid advance here. Russia continues to talk about reinforcements from Ukraine being brought up. If they are, they might be reinforcing. We're not seeing much of an advance further into Russian territory. Now, there have been a couple other, when we talk about these different battlefield updates, it's at risk. I'm skipping over major portions of the front. And that runs the risk of suggesting that things aren't happening there, and that's just not the case. There is continual fighting, especially in the east and the south, all up and down the front. But coming from Russian sources and talking about a couple different areas here, Chasiv Yar continues to be a focus of Russian forces. They've advanced a little bit, but the movement there has been very, very slow in recent weeks. The same thing down here, and there were some rumors of a Ukrainian advance in Toretsk. It looks like that might have just been a maybe minor counterattacks in certain areas. And then over here near Pokrovsk, it does look like Russia has largely slowed down. There was a little back and forth with Ukrainian forces starting to pinch on the sides of this pocket here, but that has pretty much stopped. But the attacks are continuing in each one of these directions. And Russia, a few weeks ago, as the Kursk operation was ongoing, was talking a big talk about an offensive down here in the Zaporozhye area, talking about the massing of forces preparing to push further into Ukrainian-held territory. That doesn't appear to have come together. There have been attacks, relatively normal-sized attacks that are continuing day in and day out, but in terms of like a large Russian force actually pushing the offensive, we're still not seeing that. But I did want to bring up a couple different movements here on the battlefield, especially up around the Kursk and Sumy region, and then the continued fighting in Belgorod. And then one last story that I thought was worth getting into here was this fiber optic plant in Russia that was destroyed. I'm going to pull up another map here. This one, I think it's a little bit easier to see and you can measure on this map more easily. So this is deep state map. Saratsk is the area that was hit by a long-range drone inside of Russia. And I want to give you an idea of how far away this is. In this area here, let's see. Here we go, Saransk. I'm all over the place with the mouse here. So Saransk right in this area here. That's further than Moscow is from a lot of territory in Ukraine. So if we'll zoom in and do a measurement here to show you. This is roughly 700 kilometers from the nearest point of Ukrainian-held territory. We'll go right in here, Kharkiv. 679 kilometers. All right, that is a deep strike. That is, again, you can strike Moscow if you move 700 kilometers right from the northern portion of Ukraine, and they have struck Moscow plenty of times now, but you're talking about 440. So what we're seeing in this case are long-range Ukrainian strike drones. 700 kilometers is longer range than the U.S.-provided ATACMS, than the French Scalp ER, than the British Storm Shadow. So Ukraine has domestically developed these long-range strike munitions that we're probably just going to see continuing to be used. And it's interesting when you think about how far they're able to get inside of Russian territory. I mean, we've got some videos of these things. Some of them are not very fast, right? The Shaheds look like race cars compared to these things. But they're able to exploit gaps in Russian air defense and are effectively striking targets. In this case, according to Russian sources, which is important in this context, they say the enemy used a UAV to attack a fiber optic plant in Saransk. Fiber optic drones, right? Talk about those a lot, a major impact on today's battlefield. They say, quote, today the plant is in Saransk, is the only manufacturer of fiber optics in the Russian Federation and covers almost half of the needs of the Russian telecom operators in optical fiber, as well as 100% of the needs of the Russian Ministry of Defense in terms of UAV control. So again, we've seen a significant rise. A couple thoughts, like, wait, Russia only has one fiber optic plant in the entire country? That seems like a problem, right? Like a weak spot in their defenses, if you will. Now, I would assume that they're also getting a lot of this cable from China because it's dual use, right? This is stuff that could be used for telecom, so there wouldn't be any issues technically in buying it on the international market, mostly from China when it comes to Russia. And, you know, China can certainly produce more of this. They probably have more than one factory when it comes to fiber optics. But there will be an impact here. If it just tightens the supply chain a little bit, that's still something, and maybe it makes it harder for China to fill that gap down the road. Either way, this is notable. Now, the fiber optic UAVs that we've seen used more and more recently, primarily by Russia. Ukraine has really picked up on this as well, and they have their own models. But Russia really led the charge on this front. Fiber optic cable spooling out of the drone can go 10, 20 plus kilometers at times. And what that does is it protects the drone from electronic warfare jamming, which there are jammers all across the front at this point. You see them on individual vehicles. We've seen some soldiers walking around with jammers on their back, which seems like a surefire way to come down with cancer in a few years. But nonetheless, there are jammers everywhere. So getting drones through all of these areas is incredibly challenging. And sometimes you don't know if the drone can actually go there until you lose signal and the drone is gone. So these fiber optic drones mitigate that threat. They also provide a much clearer picture of the target so you can discern, and we've seen this a couple times too, where fiber optic drones get up to what they normally would have hit, but as they get closer, the picture is so clear they can identify this is a decoy. This isn't actually a tank or an APC or an artillery piece, and they go find another target. So fiber optics have really been kind of the leading edge of drone technology for a while now. In this war, the majority of drone strikes we're seeing in the Kursk region, or were in the Kursk region, were fiber optics. So any hit to that at all is going to have a major impact on the Russian war effort. I would not expect to see their use of fiber optics fall off a cliff anytime soon. Again, this is the plant that manufactures some that are used for the Russian Ministry of Defense, but again, it's clearly a soft spot in the overall Russian defense sector, and good on Ukraine for seeking that out and hitting it. And by the way, the guys at the plant, they said no casualties. They said nobody was killed. So how about that? Just taking out the military capability and not even wounding any civilians in the process that happened to work in that plant. So seems like a pretty effective strike by Ukraine. But I'll put the sources for all of this in the description below if you want to read more. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.